What this series means to me, hopefully we have conveyed the scope of this trilogy in a way that makes you feel like you're watching the most important story ever told. It is the story of humanity from the moment we realize we're not alone all the way up until the very end. And, you know, I can't imagine anything bigger than that.
The three things holding Netflix's three-body problem back from being anything more than mediocre are their typical bland filmmaking, a mundane dramatization of the info dumps that make up most of the books, and an over-eagerness to reach specific, clippably viable spectacles at the expense of the depth of the storytelling it takes to get there.
If we can just get the audience to episode 5, we got them. We got them hooked.
It had those moments, moment after moment after moment, of those things that made your eyes kind of pop out of your head, made you go back and read it again to make sure you got it right. And they're just things that you had to try to put on screen because they were just so mind-blowing. They were so unlike anything you'd ever seen before.
The Judgment Day sequence was one of those ones that we talked about before where you just think, oh man, I really want to see that on screen, see it done right. So it's a pretty mind-blowing trilogy, and it ends so spectacularly and so like beautifully imagined. And we were both looking for something big and epic in genre, but we didn't want to do fantasy again after Thrones. And so there was just something about this. It was so different from everything we'd done before. And it was so intimidating because it's a hard adaptation, you know, it's a really tricky one. And I think that kind of the fear and the excitement of it made us feel like this might be the one.
This last reason is what also fueled 2/3 of Three Body Problems showrunners David and Dan's motivations to adapt A Song of Ice and Fire into the now infamous Game of Thrones series.
Everything changes after this point. It's kind of the end of the innocence, you know, it's Ned's death was so pivotal at the end of season 1, and everything changed from that point. And even though there have been many big moments since then, there's nothing that compares to the Red Wedding. So it's all different after this.
This was an event that was not only from the books, but it was one of the primary reasons that we wanted to make this show. We thought that this was getting to the Red Wedding for us was such a major milestone.
I mean, on some level, what drew us into it is how different it was from Game of Thrones, but how similar the feeling was that we got reading Thrones books, which was just, I love this genre, but I've never seen this genre done this way before.
Though their focus was on the Red Wedding, there were plenty more shocking events they made use of, and, in their rejection of and in the absence of the books, increasingly relied on to keep the phenomenon grinding along until desperately excreting a rushed ending.
But then once they're hooked in with moments like that, you're kind of making an unspoken agreement with the audience that hit that you give them, you're going to keep on delivering those, and they're going to get habituated to it, so you're going to need to keep on delivering bigger doses of it. And that's a really difficult thing to do in a book, in any story, in a way that's organic to the story. But what was kind of great about the books is that they provide some of those up front, but they don't dole out the really crazy stuff all at once. They don't spend it all at once. It would be hard to describe them without ruining everything, but there are at least 2 or 3 really big ones in this season, and then second season there would be more and bigger.
Yeah, I feel like on Thrones, I remember saying when season 1 came out, if we can just get the audience, if we can just get to the Red Wedding, if we can survive as a show, because, you know, it was hard to get the pilot picked up, and then when season 1 comes out, our ratings were meh. And you're just hoping, like, please pick us up for season 2. And then I remember saying at some point, I don't know if it's at Comic-Con or whatever, if we can get the show to the Red Wedding, if we can survive that long, we'll be fine to get to the end. And for me with this one, there's a scene in the second season, which I won't spoil, but I feel like if we can get to that scene and then the audience will be along for the whole ride.
Wishing to bring to life specific moments of shock or spectacle is a perfectly acceptable motivation for adapting something, but the impact of these moments and the overall quality of the project still needs to be propped up by good storytelling and filmmaking across the board. In this regard, the major difference between Game of Thrones and Three Body Problem is this. The Ice and Fire books have a variety of dense storylines and characters, more than any conventionally paced and profitable TV show could reasonably give the time or budget to, whereas the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, as it's called, uses a handful of vaguely established characters to deliver endless scientific info dumps. As such, D&D have an understandably larger amount of wiggle room to take liberties with Three Body Problem than they did with the huge swathes of narrative details they were expected to show strict loyalty to with Game of Thrones. However, as restrictive as Ice and Fire dictated writing Game of Thrones to be, having a huge amount of already mostly TV-suitable narrative events, locations, and dialogue to pull from alleviates a lot more of the infinitely heavy weight of creativity they have no choice but to exercise to invent things from the beginning of Three Body. As has been angrily well documented, the quality of the Game of Thrones seasons and the storylines within them directly correlates with how much D&D abandoned the increasingly convoluted books until George Martin's snail pace of a writing schedule left them without books entirely. Their passion for the series dropping after reaching their goal of adapting The Red Wedding may have contributed to the decreased quality of their writing, and most definitely contributed to their impatience to move on to other things as soon as possible, but that the quality went so steeply downhill after discarding and then losing the ability to reacquire the crutch the books originally provided doesn't bode well for their ability to write at a high quality from the onset of a series for which they have no choice but to invent their own TV-suitable dramatizations. As I'm sure you'll agree that even if they cut out a whole half of the book's info dumps, characters of only enough depth to be unlikable, theorizing about and being occasionally shocked by fake science for 90% of each episode isn't something a profitable size of audience is going to be enthralled by. This time, D&D are joined in their showrunning responsibilities by Alexander Wu, previously a producer on the vampire soap opera True Blood, I unsurprisingly have no interest in, and a co-showrunner with Max Borenstein on the second season of The Terror. So how did the infamous talents of D&D and the unproven talents of Alexander Wu make use of the relative freedom the info-dumping structure of the Earth's Past trilogy provided them? To put it shortly, they condensed a whole bunch of stuff and simplified or removed a whole bunch of the scientific explanations in order to get to the good stuff as fast as possible. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Whilst the convolution of the later Ice and Fire books needed some streamlining, the watering down of most of the ambiguous dark fantasy elements in favour of the more bombastically superficial ones like dragons was disappointing. Likewise, a lot of the science of Earth's past does need to be remixed to make for compelling dialogue, but they have gone so far in trying to keep the attention of anyone who would be bored by or misunderstand even the simplest of explanations that several key plot beats aren't properly set up, and the emotional payoff, or even just the feeling of that's a cool idea, miss their marks.
I mean, at a certain point, there are places where you have to make a choice. Like, are you going to stop the forward momentum of a sequence, actually explain what quantum entanglement is, or are you not going to do that? Spoiler alert, there's quantum entanglement. Physics student, spoiler alert, major plot point. You know, so I think in some places we chose to let the images speak for themselves and not dig overly deeply into the deep science of it, only because it just doesn't jibe with the medium we're working in.
The first Earth's Past book, which is the only one actually called Three Body Problem, features a few cool ideas, but is less of a spectacle than the two others. This is what I mean by the showrunners wanting to get to the good stuff.
Cixin Liu, to his credit, created these books that are terrifying for anyone foolish enough to try to adapt them, and also just made us very hungry for the possibilities.
It was always about doing justice to his ideas, which were one of the primary reasons why we were doing this show, because they're unlike any other ideas any of us had ever read, while still staying true to the thing that was going to be most important to the people watching the show, which was the characters in the show and our, what I hope is our love for the characters in the show.
I don't think there's anything quite like our show.
There's so many different strands and different worlds at play, different characters, not just in one place, but across different times and different sort of realities almost. I'm proud most of all of I think the way that we just tied those things together into what I hope is a coherent kind of unified viewing experience.
Yeah, I'm really excited to share with everyone things they have never seen before, things that we've never tried putting on screen before, things that no one has ever put on screen before.
You know, the first scene of the show is very similar to the first scene of the novel, and the last scene of the season is very similar to the last scene. In between, there's all sorts of deviations, all sorts of things. We brought in some stuff from book 2, we brought in stuff from book 3. There's some stuff we invented, but at the end, like, we're trying to be true to Cixin Liu's vision and to that, what he made us feel, which was, wow, the universe is a lot bigger than we thought about before. We're almost certainly not alone in the universe, and that might not be a good thing.
Three Body Problems' first season actually draws from all 3 books by taking the characters disconnected by many years and bringing them to the same place at the same time. So close in time and place, in fact, that they are all best friends.
We created this group that we have nicknamed the Oxford Five that doesn't exist in the books. The main protagonists of the 3 books in the trilogy typically have fairly little interaction with each other, especially in the roughly present day period of the books. They all exist contemporaneously, but they don't really know each other. It makes it a challenge for a television series.
It's a pretty heavy show, so we needed to get a sense of who they are as people before the real weight of the show is thrown on their shoulders.
The consequence of the story now revolving more closely around this Oxford Five is the decrease in scale, and therefore significance, the plot and science carry the existential tension of the story with. It just isn't believable, and makes the stakes seem small, that all of the protagonistic perspectives and technological advancements come from the family and friend group of this one Scooby-Doo gang.
To us, we felt you would care more if these people knew each other and cared about each other. So that's what that was born out of. And we were all attracted to the idea of the major characters of this story all having a shared history together and having a connection to one another. Then the challenge was, well, what were they going to be like? A lot of the heavy lifting for us was to find a way to quickly engage with this core group of people. And, you know, we put 5 of them out there. You add Rod, 6. And to find an efficient way to connect with these characters was maybe, you know, the primary task in episode 1 for us.
Put another way, it's just contrived, taking a big chunk out of the suspension of disbelief budget the more outlandish sci-fi concepts are already spending most of, and denying us the entertaining trope of the convergence of each character's separate storyline. Them already being a tight-knit group leaves us playing catch-up in their history, contradicts the probability that experts across several fields wouldn't all come from the same place, reduces the variety of locations we can be visually stimulated by, and misses the thematic significance of strangers learning to work together for a common goal, the risks of which determine the alien civilization's decision not to coexist with humanity if and when they reach Earth.
We cannot coexist with liars.
What makes the Oxford Five yet more unbelievable, and also extends to the supporting cast of scientists and strategists they cross paths with, is how little everyone comes across as geniuses in their field, capable of having enormous resources at their disposal.
Ho, ho, ho.
I started a company that manufactures them for a variety of potential medical, energy, and materials applications.
But I swear to God, if you don't shut the fuck up, I'm gonna punch a hole straight through your head.
Time is a motherfucker.
Sin frenos.
Smartest person I've ever met.
Oh, and boy genius. Who's behind it? So you're trying to tell us that this game was designed by aliens?
For a genius, you don't know much.
Sansa thinks she's smarter than everyone.
She's the smartest person I've ever met.
She always said you were the smartest one.
And there's no one who can design it besides you.
I said no.
We've got some of the best physicists in the world working on this. The resources are insane.
I'll go.
Who are you?
Edgar.
Don't be a retard, Edgar. I'm talking about serious people.
Whereas the spectacles in the book are built up over paragraph upon paragraph of the kind of scientific thought experiments I'd imagine 2 inebriated STEM students to be having at a party, the spectacles in the TV show are hindered by the mediocre generic filmmaking of several rushed mysteries, the most baffling and shocking of all continuing to be the inefficiency with which Netflix uses their enormous budgets, and how much that suggests they'll have to spend on the comparatively colossal scales of the events in book 2 and 3, where the mundanity of the drama between each and every every human character will be even more out of place. Ultimately, the books provide a flatly written context for some compelling and some tedious theories and concepts, the supposed originality or innovation of which are praised most vocally by the readers for whom this series can be considered baby's first sci-fi. But the way David and Dan echo the easily amazed sentiments of the biggest fans of the books really lays their low standards and the reasons for the spectacle-chasing mediocrity of their writing out in the open.
The guy's brain is so much more advanced and so much different from anybody else's brain out there. That the guy being Cixin Liu, the author of the books, that we had to go for it.
When I said yes to them, they rang me up and I just said, yeah, of course I'll do it. I hadn't even read the scripts just because of my history with them and their just skills, their talent at storytelling and writing.
So I started reading George's, the first book, A Game of Thrones. I got about 200 pages into it. I got to the scene where Bran gets pushed out of the tower window, and I fell in love with it, became obsessed. I called Dan and said, you need to check out these books because I might be crazy, but I think this could be the greatest series of all time. I was a couple hundred pages in.
Is it freeing now to be ahead of the book, or is that another anxiety area?
It's freeing and terrifying in equal measure.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was always a kind of a comfort in knowing, even say season 5, where we had already deviated significantly from the books. We had certain set pieces from George's novels that we knew we were heading towards, and you know, whether it was the Walk of Atonement or something else. That's the first one that comes to mind. Season 6 is the first time where, aside from a couple of scenes on the Iron Islands, it's pretty much entirely original. I don't know if original is the right word, because it's still an adaptation, obviously. It's still George's characters, but it's none of those scenes take place in the books, at least yet. So that's nerve-wracking, but also, yeah, also liberating. I mean, it's just different writing a scene. If you're taking a scene from a book and trying to figure out how to make it work, you're exercising different muscles in your brain than if you're inventing a scene whole cloth. And I'm mixing metaphors terribly here, but regardless, it was fun. I think it was the most fun season to write.
In the end.
Yeah.
Then you go to HBO, you make a pilot, which they did not run.
No.
Why did they not?
Because they wanted people to watch the second episode.
I see. So it didn't come out good?
No, we made every possible
We've never
mistake.
done this before.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Last time I Googled myself was season 2 of Game of Thrones, and I've never done it since.
It's a cold turkey experience. No more Googling yourself.
And apparently everyone loved it from then on, so I'm happy.
To the best of my knowledge.
That's what Dan told me.
Yeah.
For me, what I hope for is endurance, you know, that people still watch it and think about it and talk about it after it's done, you know, and that it lingers in people's minds, and it's not just one of these pop culture phenomenons that's a big deal when it's happening, and then 2 years later everyone's forgotten about it. Like, I think what would make me most happy is if it still has some lasting value, you know, in 2030.